Hi everybody, and welcome to Learning with the Latch Manual, Strange But True Edition. Thank you to your program organizers for inviting me to give you this Canadian edition of Learning about the Latch Manual, and also for helping you be able to get a Latch Manual. If you happen to have one with you for this presentation, it would certainly be a good opportunity to look through it as we go along, but don't worry, it will still be perfectly fine if you don't have a Latch Manual as we do this. My name's Denise Donaldson, and I'm the owner and editor of Safe Ride News Publications. So we make the Latch Manual as well as some other products like Safe Ride News Newsletter, the School Bus Safety Handbook, and I also run a local program in the Seattle area where I live in Washington State. If you have any questions during this presentation, since it's recorded, I will be on afterward to answer them live. If you'd like to email them to me at denise@saferidenews.com as we go along, then I'll be ready to answer them at the end. Or if you just want to give them to Jason and he can ask them at the end, that's fine too. I should also mention that last week I had the opportunity to do a recording for CPST-I that is a presentation that's called Latch Manual 101. So again, it's about the Latch Manual, and it was for Canadian Latch Manual users specifically, but it's more of a section by section explanation. So if you're interested in that as well, just be aware that it is available, but we're going to talk about slightly different things in this presentation. So our objectives then will be to become familiar with latch or UAS instructions for vehicles and car seats, because we want to learn about how to find that stuff in the Latch Manual, and that's very important, but what we actually want to know is the usage, the proper usage. As we go along, I'm going to tell you about some helpful resources, and in addition to the Latch Manual, I was asked to say a little bit about the School Bus Safety Handbook, so I will add that at the end. And then I also want to provide you with updates on the outlook for latch/UAS. And when I say that, one of the things that you should know about is in this January, NHTSA released a final rulemaking to improve latch ease of use. And most of those would update the way cars are equipped with latch systems so that they aren't as hard to find the parts, they're labeled, they're not as hard to push the connectors onto, etc. Of course, this is NHTSA, it's not Transfer Canada, but as we know, these kind of changes that will occur due to this rulemaking are going to be seen also for you in Canada as well. So this is just the first page of a very long document that covers all the things that we will start to see coming through because of new requirements for latch. However, the compliance date isn't until September 2028, so we do have a few more years, but early compliance is allowed, and even though there's a phase-in period even after that, we should start to see some changes as we go through. You may have heard we have a regulatory freeze here, and I recently learned that this rulemaking will go through, that it's been reviewed and is reset to go through kind of on the schedule that I've just described. So as I go through this presentation, a few of the points in this document I'll make comments about so that you have an idea of what to expect in the future. I always include a slide like this, though, when I talk about the Latch Manual, because while I want to make sure you understand how to use it, I also want to make it clear that I'm never saying you shouldn't use the instructions and labels for the car seat as well as the vehicle's owner's manual. But do be aware that the information in the appendices for the Latch Manual was provided by these manufacturers, and frequently they update what's in those manuals, and they certainly support what's in the manuals. So while that is a supplement to the owner's manuals, this isn't information that at Safe Ride News we figure out ourselves or make up or even get from the manuals and just write it up. We always get that information from the manufacturer, and before we go to press, they approve what we're saying. So this is coming from the manufacturers as clarification for us in the field. Every 2 years we update the Latch Manual, so that's why the color changes for the cover. The current one is blue. Just be aware that you don't need to keep the old ones. In fact, you really shouldn't, because while we add new cars and car seats, we also are going to have a complete review of all the information, and policies and information do change. Corrections are made, clarifications are made, and they're too numerous for me to even go through all the changes. You really should check each manual specifically out in the field. And we don't take out any of the older cars, so you don't need to keep the older books to get those older vehicles. You're still going to have them. Okay, so just a little get the landscape for the Latch Manual, if you will, at first. Just so you know, there's a glossary, and then there are 8 chapters that are kind of like our textbook for Latch. And then there are 3 appendices, A, B, and C. And it's those appendices we're mostly going to talk about today. Appendix A is about the car seats and their latch components. Appendix B is about latch components in vehicles. And then Appendix C takes information about both of those and pulls them together to one small appendix that talks specifically about using latch in center positions. So before we go into our strange but true kind of scenarios, I do want to point out that the Latch Manual has a glossary, as I noted, and that's important especially for my friends in Canada because sometimes we're not using the same terminology. Latch, for one, as you can see, it's a latch manual, and I know that's not the terminology you use. I'm sure you're very familiar with that, but there may be some things that I say in the Latch Manual that you aren't familiar with the terminology. So please be aware that things are defined in a glossary. And of course, if you don't find something that you're confused about, please reach out to me and I'll answer the question, and I'd love to make the Latch Manual clearer for you as well. In general, as I do this presentation, I should also note that I am an expert at the Latch Manual, but definitely not at being a CPST in Canada. And so as much as I strive to be aware and to speak your language as much as I can, if I make mistakes, I apologize in advance. It's not due to lack of caring, but probably either ignorance or that I've forgotten. So I really, really appreciate when you reach out to me and let me know that things could be different. I will say for the 2025 Latch Manual, I was very pleased to have support from some members of CPSAC who did some reviews for me and pointed out some areas where it could be more Canada-friendly, clearer for Canadians. And so we did make those updates, and that's particularly in Appendix A. So in general, though, as we go, please always feel free to reach out. The other thing I want to make sure you understand is speaking of Appendix A, how to use that when you're a Canadian. So Appendix A is a long appendix that has alphabetized brands, and there are 41 of those representing the 41 brands of car seats sold in the US. Only about 21 of those are sold in Canada, and plus there are 7 adaptive car seat brands in the Latch Manual that are of importance to you, but definitely not, as easy to get on your market as perhaps they are here. But of those 21, even some of those are a little obscure, or maybe are no longer in business, but there are still some car seats on the market. But that is, of course, a subset of all the brands. So I wanted to just show you how to know which ones are in Canada. Now, of course, you probably are pretty aware of what's in Canada and what's not, but I want to make sure that it's clear in the Latch Manual as well. So that's why I'm pointing to page A4. In this section under Layout, Contents, and Content of the entries, it's going to tell you how for each entry what you should expect in order. And so it lists through the manufacturers in alphabetical order. It's going to go through the lower anchor attachments first, and then the tether information next. And then it's going to go into any of the extras like recalls, entanglement, and you can see there's a Canada-specific details in that list of things that would come at the end. I'll talk a little more about that in a moment, but I also want to point out that there is a section that's going to tell you about how to find the information or what it's, where we get it. Also about abbreviations that are in the book. I try not to abbreviate things as much as possible, but there are some abbreviations. And then there are usage expectations that are kind of the givens. So for instance, I don't say for every description of using the lower anchor attachments that you should tighten the straps. That's a given. And another given that's important for you to know about is that it's stated under tethers. Tethering is always required for forward-facing car seats in Canada. So that's a given that's not stated for every single one, and it's not called out specially for every brand, but we do understand that that's a law in Canada that we don't have in the US as much as our US brands do encourage tethering. And then just FYI, there's also a section on this page for ways to stay up to date. So again, how does Denise know what car seats are in Canada? Well, I asked the manufacturers when we do this process we go through to get Appendix A filled out. We would ask the manufacturers for certain information. They give it back to us. And one of the things we ask is what would be different about usage in Canada? And so you can see here that if there is anything that's different, we're going to have a heading that's Canada-specific details. That would be Canada latch use that varies is the heading that we would use. And in addition, we would have that heading if the manufacturer doesn't sell any car seats in Canada. So if you don't see the heading, it just means use everything in the entry just the same as you would in Canada, as you would in the US. And if it does say that heading, then either it's going to give you some additional latch-related usage variations, or it will be telling people that they don't sell in Canada. So, for instance, here we have a heading for Combi, and it's just telling you Combi CRs are not sold or distributed in Canada. But there are many that would actually give you some usage differences, and here's just a few of the examples where you find that heading and then find how to slightly skew or alter what's in the information that's in the other pages. Some of them actually do call out that you should use the lower anchor attachment weight limits in Canada the same as in the US. And then, like I said, if you don't see a heading for Canada latch use that varies, it means that follow all the information in the entry in Canada, no changes needed. And this is an example for Romer. So, moving now into the strange but true edition information. The way this is going to work is that there are a few places where I will call out some kind of an oddity. You know, as I go through reviewing the Latch Manual for each edition, I find some things that are very unusual, and I wonder if technicians actually notice this. And so I thought it would be kind of fun to call some of these things out. While, of course, it's important to know some of the strange things you might encounter, it's even more important to maybe pull that thread a little bit and find how that also relates to other things that are a little more common. So this first one is a question: does any vehicle have a position that allows installation using lower anchors that does not also have a seat belt? So we have a lot of cases where we have a seat belt but no lower anchors, or we have lower anchors or a seat belt. But this is asking, is there lower anchors but no seat belt? So it's not really a seating position. Well, strange but true. It's not common, but in the 2004 through 2007 Ford Freestar and Mercury Monterey, there is a seat situation, as you can see in the owner's manual here, where you can either use the two outboard on the bench seat options or just use the inner bars from the two outboard to make one seating position for latch or UAS there. And so this is what that vehicle would look like. You can see that the buckles are in the middle. There are seat belts for the two outboard. There's no seat belt for the center in this particular car, but you could push down those buckles and set the car seat in that position and use the lower anchor bars. Now, I want to be clear, this isn't a borrowing situation because the anchor bars have been moved for the outboard inward so that they are set just far enough apart so that those two inner bars actually make a standard latch position in the center. In other words, they're 11 inches apart center to center. And so a couple things to note there. This particular seating position doesn't have its own tether anchor, but you are told in the manual that you can go ahead and use either of the other two anchors for it. And of course, as you can tell, this is going to limit what we can do in the other situations, in the other seating positions. You can't, of course, attach two anchors to one bar, whether it's a lower anchor or a tether anchor. So if you choose this option, it's going to have limitations. Of course, this will be in the Latch Manual. So if you go to the Ford entry and you look at the table that has vehicles for 3 or more rows, so you'd go past all of the alphabetized vehicles with 1 or 2 rows, and you go start over alphabetized in the 3 or more rows, and you'll find Freestar has a center note that basically goes through all the information that I just showed you in the owner's manual, making that description. So if you're not familiar with this kind of setup, a few of the brands, mostly earlier on, did come up with this way to provide a standard latch pair in the center. And this is another example. This is a Ford Taurus that had this same setup for many, many years. You may have seen this, where you can see they're not aligned in the outboard positions with their seat belts. And in this car, there is a center seating position, so there's a seat belt, but you can see that the two markers are set, and it's officially in the owner's manual saying that yes, that's also an official standard set of latch in that position as well. And just to follow up with where you can find this in the latch manual as well, another interesting thing would be to look at Appendix C. Again, that's where we talk all about center use. And in Appendix C, there is a table C2 that lists all the different cars that have the option to use standard latch in the center. So where the vehicle manual has to say it's okay because it's a standard center latch, but the car seat manufacturer doesn't have to be consulted necessarily because this is an official latch position. As long as latch is okay to be used, this would be an okay place to install the car seat using latch. So table C2 is broken down into 5 different configurations. You can see the first 3 are here and they're pictured. So the first one is that kind we just described, where they've decided to slide them inward and make them all even. And that Ford Freestar and Mercury Monterey is noted here as the oddity of not having actual seating position there, but okay to use that standard center. There are configurations 2 and 3 as well, as you can see pictured, which are also fairly rare. And then on the second page, there are 2 more configurations. Configuration 4 has situations that's just one center in the whole row, or so there's nothing adjacent, or there's one adjacent to it, so an outboard and center. And then configuration 5 is going to be all those vehicles that have 3 sets of latch, so 6 bars across, where we have latch in all those positions. So situations like this, where there's enough space and they've decided to go ahead and give 3 sets of latch across a bench seat. Now, even when we have this, though, I really have to draw attention to the note here, which is going to warn you, even when you have them adjacent to each other or 3 in a row, always check on restrictions for using multiple latch at the same time, because frequently there are restrictions to doing that, not to mention space constraints when you're trying to put 3 across. Also in Appendix C, just FYI, there is a table C1 that is about borrowing. That's when you're actually using the inner bars of the outboard latch positions to make a non-standard center latch. So a situation like this, where you have the 280 millimeter standard sets on the outboard, and a situation where the center is wider than 280 millimeters would make it non-standard. You need to get permission from both the car manufacturer and the car seat manufacturer to be allowed to do this. And so that's why we have this table, to kind of have the vehicles on the one side and the car seats that allow this on the top. And then they are organized by how wide apart they can be, the bars, to make them allowed. And so you can cross-reference to the width of the bars across here to see whether it's a yes or a no. And of course, any car seat or car model that's not listed here would be a no, because it has to be a yes from both the manufacturers when that's the case. Now, of course, remember that Appendix C is a quick reference list appendix, and it draws from the source material that is in Appendix A and Appendix B. So anytime you're looking for the source material, you can just go check there as well. So in Appendix A, that's going to be under Center Installation. You can find out all about borrowing there. And Appendix B, in the bullet section here, which is the gray part at the beginning of each entry, there's a lot of brand-wide information that I really encourage you to check out, and always positioned in the top center of this rectangle on that first page of the entry is going to be center position borrowing, and that's where you'd find out about the car. So you can always go back to Appendix A and B, to the source material, and check one and then check the other and see how they match. Appendix C just kind of gives you a nice cross-reference as a quick check. So here's another strange but true situation. Is there a vehicle that allows an accessory to be attached to a tether anchor at the same time as the car seat's tether? typically it's a no-no, right? We don't usually attach two things at once, but strange but true, this does exist, and here we have it. It's in the 2008 through 2019 Smart 4.2 vehicle, and of course that's a tiny little vehicle. And I think actually in Canada this car came around more in the even earlier in 2004 possibly. So you've had it a while. Stopped making it in 2019, and to be clear, it does not have a back seat. It just has two front seats, just for two. And so you might wonder, well, why would we need to know about that? You know, who would put a child in this car? And my answer to that is always, if it's a car, there's going to be people out there trying to put children in it, because children are part of our lives. And even if it doesn't seem plausible to us that someone would think of it as a child's car, at one time or another, someone's going to try to put a child in the car. And so that is one of the reasons why NHTSA requires them to have, and Transport Canada requires to have tether anchors. And so if you look in the owner's manual for the vehicle, you can find that it's going to show you and talk about that tethering situation for that passenger vehicle, passenger side seating. Number 2 is just identifying that's the seat back. Number 3 is the actual tether anchor itself, which is on the floor. And number 1 is a kind of funny looking little bow tie thing. And I know you guys are so great at always tethering, so you may even already be familiar with this, but because we are angling down here and going over a narrow top to the seat, it's great that they have this little guide that you put the tether through. Tether strap goes through and then it hooks down here. Now getting back to our strange but true, that particular vehicle has an accessory called the Divider Plus that is an area that can be used to separate cargo from the front passengers, and it uses that big anchor, which this is an image of the tether anchor here, to keep it sturdy and hold it in place there. So this is an excerpt from the owner's manual to the right here. It says, if you're using Divider Plus, the hooks of the top tether and the Divider Plus are attached to the same anchorage. So that gets me most of the way there, but as a CPST, personally, I don't feel comfortable with that being clear enough to me that you can put them both on at the same time. So I just point out, this is the kind of thing we're looking for, is things where we can make it a lot clearer or make it certain for us for our work in the field. So for the latch manual, I would say the Divider Plus accessory hook and the CR tether hook can be attached to the tether anchor at the same time, just to make that extra stretch to make sure it's clear. So the Smart entry this is it. It's pretty small because they just had the one vehicle. But I thought I'd also point out here, under their center position borrowing, it notes that there are no lower anchors on any of the Smart vehicles. So that's why you see under second row, there's an NA that are not available. There's no seating position in the outboard, and there's only the tether anchor for the front seat that's listed here in the notes. And I point this out partially because, as I noted in the earlier, that the NHTSA update to latch usability, one of the things that they've done is they've taken away a lot of the exceptions that for small cars like this and for convertibles not having tether anchors. They're going to start saying that they need to make them available. So we'll start to see fewer vehicles like this that would be allowed to not have meet the full requirements for latch. When I set up this particular description of two things hooked to one tether anchor, perhaps you might have thought of this situation. So in pickup trucks, we frequently have these router system with an indirect tethering method where you have a router that you'd go through. In this picture down below, there's two car seats. We're looking through the back window, and their tether straps are going through a router, and then they're taking a right or a left and getting hooked to the anchor that goes for the center position. And as you can see in the image, when there are two car seats in these vehicles, there are two hooks to the same anchor. This is another example. It's not an accessory, it's actually two tethers to the same tether anchor. And this is another case where it's allowed. And I will tell you that definitely for every case of this sort, in the latch manual, we make it clear if you're doing this situation that you're allowed to have them both. So you have that in writing from the manufacturer that this scenario is okay. Typically, they're going to be talking in manuals about one car seat at a time. They don't often go into what happens when there's multiple. So that's one of the things as CPSTs we kind of need to know. Another reason I wanted to bring this up is that the other way we really often see tethering, and I know tethering is super important in Canada, it's like it is here, is that we have this more direct routing system. But what typically happens in a pickup is you have to fold the back seat back forward in order to get back and access that anchor. And I know you've all worked in this situation. Sometimes, most often it's on the back wall. Sometimes it's on the back of the seat back. But I just wanted to point out that NHTSA's decided that this kind of obscuring or blocking of the anchor is not going to be allowed in the future. So as much as this is a direct system, it's not an easy system to do, right? Because we have to figure out how to put the car seat aside while we get it hooked up, and then we have to tighten it with the seat up. And then what NHTSA actually noted, and what I've been noting, is it's really easy to get the car seat reinstalled without being actually certain, or it's possible to happen without the seat back actually being locked back into place, which is a really dangerous situation. So in other words, your car seat could be nice and tight, it can be tethered, but if the seat back hasn't reclasped on, then the seat back itself can be pushed into the child, into the back of the car seat. So that is a danger that we do see. So when you see these, I've really been trying to remind people, and we say in the latch manual every time, be sure that the seat back relocks. And NHTSA took it a step further, saying that this isn't a good way to do tethering in pickup trucks or in other cases. So we can definitely expect to see the kind of tether anchors that have the router system more often, because these ones that are blocked by the seat back won't be allowed anymore. There are, since we're on the topic of tethering, I do want to cover a few more of the changes that have come up from this new rulemaking. NHTSA really proposed to make it required for all the tether anchors to be a metal crossbar, and the type that we'd be more familiar with, like in these pictures. And they did end up ruling that that would be true, but they made a bunch of exemptions, and those include pickup trucks and convertibles, small buses. So the places where we currently see a cargo strap or other type of an anchor, they're still going to be allowed in those cases. On the floor will still be okay, but not deep under the seat. So if you're familiar with a Honda Odyssey, where we in the captain's chairs would have an anchor way underneath the seat, those are no longer like that, but this would no longer be allowed to ever occur. So this type under the seat won't ever happen. But the ones on the floor, like in the 4.2, would be allowed. Along these same lines, I think this is good news, on the same kind of track as no obscured tether anchors or no blocked ones. If the tether anchor is blocked by the cargo floor when you roll the seat back as far as it goes, like you would usually want to do, like in this picture of the Toyota Prius V, then that is going to be not allowed. They would have to redesign that to make it higher. And the other thing that this same car demonstrated were these cases where the tether anchor is blocked by carpeting on the back of the seat, and might be scored and you have to punch it through. We see that a lot in a lot of vehicles, and that would no longer be allowed. So there can be carpeting around it, but at the factory they need to expose that anchor, and it would have to be labeled. So I use this Prius V as an example because it shows a couple of those cases that would no longer be allowed. But I should note that, of course, since these pictures and since this model range, the Prius V has been redesigned. So these are no longer issues with this vehicle, but there still are a lot of vehicles, as you know, that still have examples of these problems. So I'm going to be glad to see those kind of situations go away. All right, here's a question for Strange But True. Is there a car seat with a removable load leg? And that might sound strange, but it's true. We now have one. And I mentioned earlier the Romer company, and it does sell both in the US and Canada now, but it came around only about a year and a half ago. So you may not have heard about them yet. I have not seen one of these in the wild, so to speak, though I have seen them at conferences. Quite nice car seats, and in this case the Junie car seat that has a Versa base has a load leg, which you don't see here because we're looking at the part that touches the seat back, but if we turn that around and we'll look at it in the owner's manual, it has a leg here, and in fact when you don't use the leg, as you can see on the right, you remove it completely from the car seat. So instead of being one where you rotate it under and use it without it, if you can't use the leg, you're actually going to physically remove it. Naturally, anytime we physically remove something in a car, we're going to need to store it somewhere where it can't become a projectile. But you can also see in the picture that this base is a little unusual in that it has this gray part is the plastic, and then there's this bar that comes forward, and there's a hub where you attach it. So that ends up making it fairly long, and so I thought it'd just be interesting to note that on this seat, the plastic part must be all on the seat cushion, but that metal part may overhang. So rather than having any kind of 80-20 guideline or any kind of inches, they're just saying make sure the plastic is all on the seat and the rest can overhang. Also in the instructions, it's going to talk about things like they should remove the floor mat when they're using it. And at this first important, it says don't use the load leg if the vehicle manufacturer does not expressly allow it. And it says to refer to the vehicle owner's manual. That's of concern to me because I've not seen any vehicle owner's manuals that do expressly allow it. So I'm a little concerned with that wording. I can point you though to the LATCH manual where we ask about load legs. And you might ask yourself, well, what does the load leg got to do with LATCH? And you are absolutely right about that. Typically we like to keep the LATCH manual focused on LATCH or at least LATCH adjacent, and load legs kind of stray a little further, but the manufacturers have asked us to include information about load legs in here, particularly the vehicle manufacturers, and so we want to keep that evened out, so we also include information from the car seat manufacturers, and so the LATCH manual is a good place to get some information about that, including there are some cases where in the notes section of an entry for a particular model, you might see where it says, as in this Dodge entry for a minivan that we're very familiar with, the Grand Caravans. On these Grand Caravans, it's going to say, don't use the car seat support leg in this vehicle, keep it stowed. So this has been something they've actually added to their owner's manuals, and then we're also applying it to some prior years for them as well through the LATCH manual information. In these cases, these are vehicles that have a void space, a false floor, where there's a storage space that you can roll the seat down under the flooring, and so they don't want to have that leg pressing into that false floor in the forces of a crash. So they're saying don't use the load leg. So you'll see several examples in the LATCH manual where it's going to tell you in the notes section. However, also be aware that just because there is some sort of storage doesn't always mean that you can't use the load leg. So some people who understood about that false floor started to over apply it to other brands, and in one example is the Honda Odyssey where you have a spare tire storage in the space between the second row and the first row. And when Honda heard that people were not using load legs there, they did some tests and determined that they could actually say to us it's okay to go ahead and use that load leg in that seat despite the fact that there is a spare tire storage there. So it's okay to do, and you can get that approved in the LATCH manual there. Now remember back with the gray section, we call that the bullet section, and it's actually defined up here at the top. What the bullet section does is talks about any point that's going to be true for every single brand. So it would otherwise be in every single note section, and we just state it once up here at the top. And so be aware that there are some that actually say you can't use the load leg on any of the vehicles of that brand. So Rivian is an example of that. This is the first year we've had Rivian in the LATCH manual, and they asked us to note not to use the support leg in their electric vehicles. They have a pickup truck and an SUV. So, but also be aware that another electric vehicle maker, Tesla, volunteered to ask us to include this information about using a support leg in their vehicles, saying that you may use it unless it's otherwise stated in a note. So they're giving permission explicitly here. So we don't have that comment from every single brand, yes or no, but we ask them if they want us to say something, then we will put it in. And so a few have. And just in case some of you aren't aware of what a load leg is, I bet most people are pretty familiar with it. We've had them at least in the US. Baby Safe by Britex came out in 2004, and it didn't do real well. So that one was only on the market for a year, and they pulled it from the market. And so many years went by, but by today we have a lot of car seats with a load leg. And whatever you want to call it, support leg, stability leg, foot prop, those are all the same things. And we have all these brands that, including this Kleckling made in Canada, that have a load leg. So I'm sure you've been seeing it. If you haven't, you're most likely going to. One other thing to note is that Evenflo has created an add-on accessory. So this one also would kind of fit the removable question at the beginning, but this one doesn't come with the car seat, at least not now. It will possibly in the future, but for its new LightMax NXT or Next, the LightMax regular doesn't have this, but the Next versions have a little port, and if you want to have a load leg, you can buy one as an accessory and add it on. And then if it's not allowed for use, of course, pop it off, store it so it can't become a projectile. So and then just to wrap up discussion of load legs, as I mentioned, I do indicate for car seats when they have a load leg in the Appendix A entry, and rarely, but sometimes that actually does become a latch situation, as here for the Ling by Kleck. They have a difference in whether they want you to use the lower anchor connectors or the seat belt. That's dependent on whether there's a load leg in use or not. So definitely check Appendix A as well as B. Okay, in our last strange but true, is there a convertible car seat with a removable upper seat back? And this has been something strange but true. This car seat's been around for a while, but the Baby Trend ProTech models, and you might remember in the past there was another company called Tomy that had this model, and now Baby Trend's had it for several years, where you can see in the owner's manual, until the child is 22 pounds, you can use it with this top part removed. And once the child is older and taller, of course, then you'd have to put it back on. So why would you even want to do that? Well, it mostly has to do, of course, with being able to fit in between the rows. And so if you have a tight squeeze anywhere, you can take that top part off, at least till the child is 22 pounds. So it's kind of a novelty, strange but true. And the reason I brought it up in this presentation is to kind of make a pivot to the topic of whether a car seat can touch the seat ahead of it or not. Because obviously a seat like that is going to be helpful if you're trying to avoid touching the seat ahead. And I've heard technicians say to caregivers, oh, you can't ever allow the car seat to touch the seat ahead. And so that's not really actually true right now. So I want to make sure everybody is familiar with the various rules that are in place and kind of the guidance for other kinds of car seats that don't have particular rules. So when it comes to Evenflo, their rear facing only car seats must not touch. You have to have 1.5 inches of space, and that is out of concern for if you're hit hard from in a rear impact and everything moves toward that rear of the vehicle, the car seat's going to do a motion that's like a rebound motion that way, and the front seat back might move backward. And so we want that to have clearance to move out of the way before that front seat could possibly deform and go back into it. So that's why Evenflo requires 1/2 inch, or I'm sorry, 1.5 inches. Be aware though, that is only for their rear facing only models. It's only in outboard positions. So if it's in the center, it's okay to touch the edges. And it's only in the second row because we're only concerned about the way that a front seat might react and deform in a very strong rear impact. So in other words, it doesn't apply to their convertible and all-in-ones, which sit up much higher. It doesn't apply to the center position, And it wouldn't apply if you happen to put the car seat in a third row, because that kind of dynamic of the front seat deforming would not be a concern. The reason this is a hot topic right now, though, is that Dorel has made a new rule, or a fairly recent rule now, that the rear-facing car seats must touch the vehicle seat ahead of it. And their rationale for that comes from doing some sled tests of frontal crashes. And what they want is for the car seat to start off very close or gently touching the seat ahead, so that when everything moves toward the point of impact in a frontal crash going forward, of course, that everything moves together, so that there's no point where the seat belts or latch will stretch out and have the head of the car seat slam into the front seat. They're going to instead move in tandem and with less chance for a head injury that way. So this is kind of opposite instructions, which with some differences I'll explain in a moment. They changed their manuals in December of 2023, but important for CPSTs is to know that they would like this information or these guidances to be applied retroactively. So any car seat that's not expired, they would like us, even before the manuals say to explain to caregivers this is how you ought to install the car seat. So their owner's manuals do show now a seat back, so that you can see that is in the pictures, and then they have wording that describes it. So we need to follow this even in older manuals that don't say it. They are just like Evenflow saying this is only applying in the outboard seat. So if we're in the center seat, we're good. We don't need to worry about this. We also are looking at any seating position. So whenever there's a seat in front, whether it's a front seat or a second row seat, we want to be touching the back of the seat or be as close as possible. So they do say if you can't make a touch, get it as close as possible. Also, the seat must be flat on the vehicle seat, and their concern there is that with a taller convertible seat like in that picture, you wouldn't want this to happen where you're touching, but it's raising it off the seat cushion. So that would clearly be a no-no. So the owner's manual just says must be touching, but I want to make clear, and I'm making this clear through discussions with Dorel, which is, your Costco, Maxi Cozy, and Safety First car seats. Anytime they say must be touching, they mean contact that doesn't push hard, doesn't change the child's angle, and it doesn't hold the car seat off the cushion. So what it doesn't mean, and that we shouldn't say, is that it's wedging or bracing or pressing. So to help kind of follow that, what the idea here is pre-crash positioning, so that the car seat and the front seat move kind of together, rather than it being something that's holding the installation tight. So by wedging or bracing or pressing, you'd get a tighter installation, but that is not what they want you to do. So we're not trying to get that, and we shouldn't use that terminology, because what we really want is just a very gentle touching. So to summarize, Dorel is saying we must touch or be as close as possible. Evenflow is saying for their rear-facing only, must not touch. And then we have all the other brands, right? So what are they saying? Well, they would say if necessary, they may touch, in the same way I just described for Dorel, very gently, not pressing into it. So you may actually see in some owner's manuals where it says don't make contact with the seat ahead. I know that those manuals are out there. I can also tell you that if you check with customer service, if you look at the FAQs on the website, even those companies like Nuna would be one, Baby Arc's another, although Baby Arc's not in Canada yet. But you're going to see information that says that it is actually okay if it must touch, just don't touch too hard. So what would touching too hard be? If you're in doubt, use what we call the sheet of paper test. So that would be where a sheet of paper is either physically or in your imagination placed between the top of the car seat and the vehicle seat back. And if you can pull that sheet of paper out without ripping it or damaging the sheet of paper, then you're right in that perfect zone where you're almost touching but not really pushing into the seat back. If the paper were to rip, then you're pushing too hard. And you also have to take into account, if you're installing a car seat with no child in it, they're not putting their weight into it. So you have to take into account the weight of the child that will be in it. And why do we have to think about that? Well, we're looking at Durrell's instructions, but we always have to think about the vehicle too, right? So vehicle owners' manuals might say not to contact the front seat. They often do say it, and this is an example of a Toyota Tacoma, which clearly says it right there in the instructions. Even when they don't come out and say it, may not want you to touch hard, and the reasons that they don't want you to push hard usually have to do with their advanced airbag suppression system. So this brings us back to the LATCH manual, because the LATCH manual can give you some advice on this point. So of course your owner's manual is going to have your airbag section, and you should definitely look at that. But we asked all the manufacturers, and we have a bullet point in the bullet section for each brand about how their suppression system works. And this is becoming more and more useful. We've had this in the manual for many, many years. But what we ask them is whether both the passenger and driver side are affected, and whether pressure and force on the back of the seat and or under the front seat will possibly mess up or disable the advanced airbag suppression system. So that is the concern, is that if you have something going on where you're putting force, there are some of those systems that are designed that would be affected by that force and may turn off an airbag that should be on or turn on one that should be off. So you want to definitely, of course, avoid that. But note that in various cases we have in the bullet, you're going to find, like for the Tesla here, the passenger side is the only one affected. So if we're pushing into, or if we're touching the behind the driver, it's less of a concern, right? Also, whether that force is just if it's applied on the underside of the front seat. For instance, if you have medical equipment like oxygen, you don't want to slide it under there if it's putting pressure on the seat, because that might disable the driver's airbag or the passenger's airbag. In this case, Tesla is not saying that pressure on the seat back would make a difference. And there actually are some examples also of other types of systems where pressure or force on the underside of either of the front driver or passenger would not affect their airbag system. So this can definitely be something that helps support the owner's manual in understanding how those kinds of installations will affect the safety of all passengers in the vehicle. And while we're on this page, I also want to point out a few other bullet points that we've been gathering lately about kind of the newer technology. One being various vehicles, not just Tesla, but several others, have what kind of loosely called easy entry feature, which is when you pull up somewhere and the driver turns off the vehicle to get out, and their seat will actually automatically roll back to give them a little more space to get out. And then when they come back, they can slide in front of the steering wheel much more easily. When they start up the car, the seat rolls closer so that they can fit in the vehicle the way they're supposed to for driving. So this is an automated system, obviously, and it can be very handy for drivers, but clearly not so good when a car seat has been installed right behind it. So Tesla is just warning people in this bullet that you want to disable that feature when there's a car seat installed right behind it. Some other things we've been asking about are rear seatbelt reminders, because if a car seat's installed with latch and their rear seatbelt reminders are present, then it might falsely give the impression that a person is not buckled up in that seat, and you might get bells and whistles going off because there seems to be a problem when perhaps there isn't. So we want to know, are there things that a person could do to disable that? And frequently it involves buckling the seatbelt when you're using latch so that it will detect that it's buckled, and it kind of tricks the system. In the case of Tesla, it also says you could go ahead and look at their information about shoulder belt entanglement, because Tesla has said you can go ahead and buckle and lock a seatbelt within reach of a child or in the seating position it's in through the car seat's belt path, and they actually say you may either leave it loose or tighten it per the car seat manufacturer's instructions. So kind of an interesting bit of information you can find there too. Just in general, I hope you are checking out all of these bullets, because we're trying to help keep them up to date with the newer technology. And I know a lot of people go and look at their model specific information, but make sure you're also looking at information that goes for all models because that's very useful as well. And just a last thing to note about this whole business of touching or not touching, whether we're working with a Dorel seat or not, sometimes we move the front seat forward to get it out of the way when we're working with car seats. And I just want to remind people, this is just giving us a little reminder that we have to think about the person who rides in that seat and whether moving their seat will affect how they fit in their seat belt. And so just a little reminder to text, if you've moved a front seat forward or into a different position of any sort, that before the parents leave, whoever's riding in those seats needs to be checking their seatbelt. And I put this resource here from the Hudson Center for Prenatal Vehicle Safety because they have some really great CPST resources for this topic. So that's a place to go if this is something that I'd like to add this to some of the things I do at car seat checks. So that's it for the Latch Manual, and I do want to note that there are free resources at saferidenews.com that support the Latch Manual or that you can use even if you don't have one. We always keep track of things that change between our editions, and so when those happen, we'll get those posted to Latch Manual updates. We don't have any of those so far this time, but we will eventually, so always check for those if you have a Latch Manual. Also, the Latch Gallery is a great place to see further pictures. So in the Latch Manual, in the notes, it'll tell you, go check out the Latch Gallery. It'll show you some more images. It'll give you a little more description that we couldn't fit in the Latch Manual. Even if you don't have a Latch Manual, the Latch Gallery can be really helpful. So please check that out. As well as you can also find a quiz for the Latch Manual. Now, if you're a CPST certified through Safe Kids, this gets you a CEU for recertification. But I must say, every time we do a new Latch Manual, I try to make the quiz helpful to anybody who owns a Latch Manual just as a learning tool. So even if you don't need a CEU at all, you can take this online quiz and it will help you kind of get the lay of the land additionally for this Latch Manual, because let's face it, it's 400 pages. If you don't get a sense of how to use it, it's not going to be much use for you. Okay, as I mentioned, I lastly want to just give you a quick rundown of what the School Bus Safety Handbook is and why you might be interested in it as well. And I know that CPSAC has some copies of this book, as well as some you can order them from Safe Ride News. I would check with CPSAC first. The School Bus Safety Handbook has 3 parts. One is how to get the buses and the child safety restraint systems that a school district or any kind of school busing provider would need. The second part is about using all those parts. And the third part is about wheelchairs on school buses. So it's going to be a book that's written in our language as child passenger safety technicians, but it's, as you can see, useful for anybody who's trying to transport small children or children with disabilities on the bus. So these are just some examples of pages. It's a bit different than the Latch Manual because it has a lot more images and descriptions, and try to lay it out so that it will be helpful. There's individual pages on certain topics that can be used for trainings and just for anybody trying to come up to speed. And the reason we have it is because compartmentalization, of course, whatever you think about compartmentalization, it can certainly be very effective in providing proper protection in certain types of crashes that involve a large bus and properly seated occupants if they're elementary age or older and they're not medically fragile. So there's a lot of limitations in that, right? I was giving a lot of qualifications. So clearly the bus has to be a large bus. If it's too small, then compartmentalization just won't work. The child can't be too small for it to work either. So preschool age children are just not big enough to actually bounce between the seat cushions in the manner that compartmentalization was meant to do. And if the child has any kind of special needs or cannot stay in position because they're not seated properly, which, let's face it, a lot of small children cannot, even if they don't have a disability, then that's not going to work for compartmentalization either. So that means those kids are going to need a child safety restraint system on the bus. And yes, these kids do ride on the bus. So it's a lot of people, if they haven't been around schools, they may not realize that infants, toddlers, and preschoolers more and more are going to early learning programs for either reasons of disability or often for socioeconomic reasons, but they do end up on school buses, and the school bus wasn't made for them. Also, it's wonderful that we are sending children with various disabilities to school so that they can get an education. And some of those situations, some of their conditions would require them, not all of them, but some would require them to use either a wheelchair or in many cases just a conventional child safety restraint system or possibly an adaptive seat as well. So because we have those kids going to school, we need to have various types of devices for them to ride safely on the school bus. And so this is another topic that, of course, is the focus of the School Bus Safety Handbook. We have a variety of types of seats that are attached to school bus seating with a cam wrap, which looks like this, going vertically around the school bus seat. This, of course, would never be used in a regular vehicle, but in school buses we have this type. We also have much more, a few for the passenger vehicles we've had in way past, we had built-ins, but those are still very popular on school buses, so built-in types of seats, as well as conventional car seats that can be used on school buses too, as long as they fit the needs of the child and can be properly anchored onto the school bus seating. So because all of those things are needed for kids in student transportation, we have the School Bus Safety Handbook. And so compared to the LATCH Manual, it's a much shorter book. It's only 100 pages, but it gives you a very good grounding on the exact types of needs that are out there, the types of setups for the school buses that you'd want for this, the things to look out for, as well as the specific models that are available of child safety restraint systems. That just gives you a real brief rundown on that. But even if you're not someone who works with people in student transportation a lot, as a child passenger safety technician, it's a really good idea to reach out to those who do so that they can be aware of things that would help them keep kids safer on school buses. So that concludes what I had to talk with you about today, and here's my contact information. As I mentioned, you can email me at info@saferidenews.com even after today, and or give us a call. We are on the Pacific time zone, and very happy to talk with you and learn about how we can make the LATCH Manual even better for child passenger safety technicians in general and for those in Canada specifically. Thank you so much, and I'm looking forward to answering your questions live.